Hello and welcome to Solvable Mysteries Extra. This is part of a series of extra content in the form of updates and special episodes that we are doing in addition to, so not replacing the normal episodes, but we're giving you more content. When we do these, you might notice that it's either me, Glenn, or Eurus by ourselves. Don't worry, we're still a team. Because Eurus and I are on different continents and major time zones, we really are only able to work together on one piece of content a week, yet both of us have the resources and desire to do additional content for the channel. It might be in the form of a casual conversation about the news, about the show, or it might be something more formal, like Eurus's magnum opus 6-hour show about Delphi, where he went really deep and updated and corrected what we had covered in our other shows. In light of that, I thought it would be fun today to go into a topic that seems to be of major interest to our viewers, which is what topics we want to cover, or what topics you, the viewers and listeners, want us to cover. We get a lot of requests from you all in the comments, which we do read every single one of, and when you request a topic, we put it on a list, which I will show in a bit. In the meantime, it's worth circling back on what topics we have covered and what topics we get some of the most requests on. I see this as an ongoing conversation that we will come back to, and I'm really looking forward to your feedback. SMP topics. What do you want to hear today? So this is something I've thought about for a while, and really it's interesting because we get so many requests from you in the comments every day, and we love getting that kind of feedback because it really helps us understand what makes the show interesting and how we can craft the show in a way that obviously gets more views, gets more subscriptions, but also makes you happy. It makes me super happy when I get all the nice comments and heartfelt comments or heartfelt compliments, and not so great when I get mean people saying mean things, but I guess that's the nature of YouTube, that there's always going to be people that don't like your stuff, and I know I've done it to people too. So with that in mind, I thought I would go ahead and lay out currently what we've been covering, and then go over some ideas for what we could cover, and then finally give you a little insight into how different show topics have been performing. So if you think about it, what we cover on SMP falls into about 3 or 4 main buckets. And those buckets, for the most part, are true crime. So true crime is actually what we had envisioned the podcast would be 100% about when we started. Maybe true crime / mystery. But in terms of true crime, we've tackled a lot of the big cases. Of course, John Benet Ramsey, the Delphi murders, which we've probably covered exhaustively at this point, but they've also given us probably the most views and new subscribers out of any single piece of content. It's pretty interesting. I had no idea that there was this untapped vein of interest in Delphi, and frankly, I hadn't even really heard it until we covered the case. But it is like the one thing that the internet is just so interested in. And then there's classic cases like DB Cooper. Everybody has to cover that. And, we got pretty good response out of that one. We've been a little reluctant to cover it because it was such a classic case that we wanted to cover newer stuff, but we went ahead and we covered it anyway. We have the Golden State Killer. That was pretty early in the show, and that was because I had just, before we even started the show, been listening to a whole series of podcasts from Wondery about the Golden State Killer, which is a topic that's pretty big here in the United States, but it also intersects well with the science bucket of topics in terms of cold cases being solved by DNA. And then there's, Hinterkaifeck, which is that classic out of the old days Europe, probably another one of those classic cases, but not really as well known in the US as DB Cooper. Maybe it's like the DB Cooper of old Europe. And, Casey Anthony, that was probably one of my favorite shows to do just because it was driven by pure outrage. I was on a roll. I think that was one of those ones where I talked a lot because I was almost felt like I was a lawyer prosecuting her again. And, that's still a case I feel very strongly about. And then Kieran Horman, which was another case I'd followed for, about 10 years, I guess. Close, roughly. And that was another one that I had pretty strong feelings about, and I still wonder a lot. Okay, so that's the true crime bucket, but then we've also expanded even from the beginning of the show into maybe true mysteries where something happened to somebody or somebody disappeared and they're not entirely sure what happened. I feel like it could kind of fall over into the true crime category, but we're really not 100% sure. So, you have Chris Kramer's Lisa and Froon, which is another one of those topics that we did multiple episodes on because there was just so much demand for it. And certainly we saw a lot of traffic from people that were interested in that case. So that was really a case of us tailoring the show to meet demand. Dyatlov Pass, I think, falls into that kind of like D.B. Cooper and Hinter Kaifek realm, but it's a mystery. You don't really know what happened there. It's super mysterious, even though it looks like lately they may have had some new findings there on what the solve was. They think maybe it was like some kind of strange minor avalanche. I don't know if I totally agree with that, but it's certainly a spooky case. Ray Rivera, which most recently was on Unsolved Mysteries on Netflix, that was mysterious. And, we pointed out on our show that we felt like Netflix's iteration of Unsolved Mysteries is a little bit biased and tends to kind of follow a sensationalist vein. It doesn't necessarily look for the right answer. It looks for the most exciting answer, I guess. And I don't totally agree with that tactic. I'm more interested in truth and facts. And if it's not spooky, well, too bad. That's sort of my stance on that. And then we had a couple others like Magdalena Zook, Cindy James, Michael Negrete. Michael Negrete was also one of those ones that I'd been following for probably half my life almost, like since it happened. And that was because he also went to UCLA and he was at UCLA right after I was. So, I think I cared about a fellow UCLA student and I felt like it was somebody that could have been me. All right. And then the other major bucket is the news and events / historical bucket. How you have like the Nashville bomber was the most recent we did there. We covered the virus that I will not name in a couple of shows. Those really didn't do well at all. And for the record, I was wrong. I thought it was a passing phase, and clearly it wasn't. And we covered Naya Rivera because it was kind of an experiment to see what would happen if we covered a really recent news event. It happened fairly close to where I live, so I was able to get out there and get pictures and get some coverage. And, it was a test. Not every test works. That one didn't. Now we use it as sort of our example of an episode where we put a lot of time into something, and then we don't really see a lot of follow-up interest. In fact, we ended up with like people arguing with us in the comments about about the show Glee, things like that. And then we had things like A Dingo Took My Baby, which was, I can't remember the name of the lady, but the Australian mother that lost her baby to a dingo, and then she was accused of killing her baby, and we actually stumbled on that. I'd heard of it before, but we covered another case of a missing Australian kid, and then it overlapped with this. I mentioned it in passing, and then we were like, oh, well, this is like another classic case, so let's go ahead and cover that. And then I think it's interesting to think about what we would call paranormal. So let's call this paranormal or science. So then we've got, I guess, the fringier part of the show that we cover. And the fringier part of the show that we cover, I think, is where you get UFOs and ghosts, and then maybe fringe science. Not always fringe science. Sometimes it's me applying science to the episode. So it's funny because UFOs are probably the topic that's been most dear to me my whole life, maybe besides ghosts. And it's the topic we get the least amount of response in. So from doing what the audience wants, it kind of looks like a no-brainer that it's not something we should spend a lot of time on. But it's too bad because, like even though some of these are pretty early, these are some of my favorite episodes in terms of what we covered. So like the Fermi paradox, which I still think is one of my best long spiels about the different aspects of the Fermi paradox and what's so mysterious about whether or not there's life in space or an intelligent life in space and why it hasn't contacted us. You have the Nimitz UFO encounter, which is still probably the best known and probably best acknowledged UFO event by the government, where even the government's like, yeah, we don't really know what that was. We're not saying it was, an airplane or a balloon or something else. It does look pretty weird, and it was with experienced pilots. So I think it was a pretty important event. It's almost landscape changing in terms of how UFOs were viewed by the serious press. And I think this might still be the case. At the time, it was the New York Times best performing article. So, it was a pretty big story. Phoenix Lights, Flight 19, O'Hare Airport, UFO sighting, and Frederick Valentik. I think that's how you say his name. Those were all interesting episodes of it's a mix of like the new and the old. A lot of these, I think the newest one was the O'Hare one, would happened in the early 2000s. So some of these either happened before I was born, or were cases that I followed like since I was a little kid, and or even dramatized in movies. And so it's pretty interesting, but I don't think you guys like it, so we're not covering that too much anymore. Maybe once in a while. Ghosts, surprisingly, we've only done one, which was the Limp Mansion, and that was an okay show. I don't know if I did such a good job on that one, but gave me a chance at least to air some of my views about spirits and ghosts. And the funny thing is, I think some of the best material on that is on the internet. Sorry, on the YouTube. On YouTube, when you see like spooky videos and things moving on their own, and you're like, well, what the heck's going on? And that's pretty interesting. I think it's harder to do. I think unless you do like those compilation videos, those are always pretty good on the topic too. But I think it's hard to do like a long form content episode on ghosts. But obviously, I'm looking forward to any feedback on that topic. So if you have something interesting to say or want us to cover and look into, well, let's do it. I'm definitely familiar with a lot of the older ones from, let's say, before the 80s. So if there's anything since then we should cover, or even anything before then, let's do it. And then finally, you have the science bucket. Science bucket is like, I would say Fermi paradox falls into that. The Tunguska event, the Tunguska event was when we had meteors. Well, they think it was a part of a comet, probably, that exploded over Siberia and leveled it as if it was a nuclear weapon. And it happened before nuclear weapons were invented. So it was pretty interesting. There was always one of those UFO crossover topics where they're like, well, maybe it could have been like the reactor from a UFO that exploded or something else. It's pretty interesting. It's worth checking out our episode. Anything UFO related, I think, falls under science because it's not, it's not true crime. It's not. It is a mystery, so that's why we cover it. But once again, it's sort of like straddles maybe a part of science that people are not as interested in. And I think it's also worth saying the UFO topic's a little bit tainted. So sometimes people just treat it weird, like you're almost seem like almost like you believe in a weird religion or something. So that's why we don't cover it too much. And definitely, I'm like a big science person, so I try to bring in science anytime we cover, any of our episodes. I always try to, I'm not a scientist, but I do try to bring in maybe a scientific perspective. So, that's where it falls, where the science bucket falls for our show. But once again, I don't see a huge amount of demand. Like, I don't think we're seen as a science show. I think we're seen as like a true crime and mystery show, which is how we market ourselves. So that's fair enough. That's what you want. That's what you're going to get. So let's talk about what we have been asked to cover in the future. So no joke. The number one request these days is JFK, and not a surprise when something happens to one of the most popular and well-respected American presidents. Really, it's a combination of things. The conventional explanation is, if it happened the way it happened, it's pretty unlikely. So it's sort of amazing in a way. Just the combination of horrible things that led to this tragedy happening. But there's also some pretty good evidence of not just a conspiracy, but maybe a vast conspiracy. And for that reason, it is a heck of a show topic to take on. Like, if we did it, and I think we will do it, it's going to be a multi-parter. And really kind of, I'm debating back and forth with Uros about whether we even want to try to bite it all off sequentially, or do it like kind of like do an episode on one part of it, and then take a breather and do some other content, and then do another episode on another part of it, and then take another breather for a couple weeks, and then come back to it. He doesn't feel the same way. I think he wants to try to just get it done with. I don't know if I can keep my level of enthusiasm high for it and do justice to it, but I'm kind of curious. I'm really curious, really, how the audience feels about that. Like, how would you all feel about whether we did it like we spent a whole month on JFK, which feels like a lot for the normal show, or whether that's something you'd rather us piecemeal or do extras on, or I don't know. It's interesting. And then 9/11, I think 9/11 I stray away from a little bit just by instinct because it's definitely political and it's touchy and it's kind of tainted by a lot of like crazy conspiracy theories, but not like I often think not the ones that actually make sense or the ones that are more important. Like it's always about the nuts and bolts, but not about the high end stuff like the broad strokes or the people behind the scenes who may have had an interest in 9/11 happening. Um, so from that perspective, up until just really recently when we did Tower 7, we stayed away from it. But I think I am willing to go back to it, but I'm really curious about the audience's thoughts once again on that. Um, and the other thing is hidden gems. So we hear all the time from the audience, from each other, Uras and I, when we talk to each other. We go on Reddit a lot, and Reddit is a gold mine of information and new topics. And I think it's also worth pointing out that because of advances in DNA, uh, you've got they're essentially solving cold cases. So you have people that did stuff like in the 60s or 70s or 50s, and they had evidence they kept that whole time. And because of this new DNA technology and tracing people via family trees and 23andMe and stuff like that, where people other family members, people related to the murderer, donated their DNA, they're able to kind of use this inference method to track someone down from their relative, let's say. So that's interesting to me. And that's something I think I'm going to start pointing out in some of these extras to sort of gauge whether it's of how much it is of interest to the audience to either understand the science or just specific cases and go over like what these dastardly people did. There's also neglected cases. So there's like Jared Negrete. That's different than Michael Negrete. Jared Negrete was a Boy Scout who disappeared in 1991 on a hike when he was with his troop, and it's something I'm actually in the process of covering for kind of a show by myself. I think there's not really enough for a whole show maybe, and I don't know that it's super interesting to Uras or even the entire audience, but it's something that definitely is interesting to me for a lot of reasons. So when I do that show, I'm hoping you all will like it. And then finally, there's just heart-touching ones that are kind of where people worth remembering, or things where they were kind of like big mysteries, and it wasn't really a crime, like the mostly harmless hitchhiker or mostly harmless backpacker, whatever his name was. That was interesting because it seemed like there were a lot of people that were really interested in this guy when they found out he was dead, and he was well received on the trail. It turned out he had a little bit of a troubled life, but I think that was like an interesting show to see how people would respond to that more of a sentimental topic. So, once again, interested in further comments about whether you like more of that or whether you want us to tone that down and kind of keep it to the crime and the mysteries, like the genuine mysteries. Finally, there's a whole huge controversial bucket, and I feel like these are really hit and miss because, like, O.J. Simpson, that's an interesting one to try to cover. Because people definitely feel different about it now than when it happened, on kind of different aspects of it. But it's interesting to think whether we would want to cover it now. I already mentioned 9/11, but if we're talking about controversy, that's certainly controversial. So that's where it gets a little bit hard to cover. Moon landing type fringe conspiracy theory stuff. We did our moon landing one, and I don't know. I feel like we kind of half-assed it a little bit. I think probably both Uras and I were a little bit casual. A lot of stuff was going on at the time in politics, so we knew it wasn't going to do super well. And frankly, I find the moon landing stuff ridiculous, but that's the kind of fringe stuff I'm talking about, where it's like flat Earth. I don't even want to cover flat Earth because that's just stupid. But things like that. But sometimes it isn't stupid stuff. Sometimes it could be interesting stuff. It could be like William Cooper stuff. It could be kind of vast conspiracies that seem so outlandish, but maybe are worth taking a second look at. I'm kind of curious. I know there's some amount of people that follow our show that are definitely interested in like the William Cooper type stuff, and from that perspective, I'm certainly willing to humor some of it and try to approach it with like a fresh perspective and not kind of my own prejudices. Okay. And then finally, there's kind of news coverage or events that happen. There's like famous historical events that maybe are charged in terms of like being a famous riot, like the LA riots, or um, different disturbances that have happened in the past, and maybe even like occult stuff, like the wild hunt, things like that. The wild hunt is actually something that I would put under almost like the ghost thing. It's like this weird phenomenon, this like spooky thing that happens in the sky. Supposedly, like you see all these like kind of spirits or gods or something rush across the sky in the old days, and it was like a harbinger of things to come. So it's interesting to think about like, is that interesting to you when it's kind of these old spooky like medieval tales, or is that to just leave that where it is, and don't take up your time with the normal episodes, or save it for an extra. Maybe that's the idea. Maybe I'll do a wild hunt extra. Okay, so if you're still with me, my question to you is, or actually what I wanted to share with you right now is, to date, so this is a lifetime of our account, I wanted to show you to give you an idea of like how things have done. And there's definitely like this long tail of, episodes that haven't done as well. And frankly, it's funny because the one that's done the best for us was the Silent Twins. Sure, those two Caribbean British uh, young ladies who, I think they committed some crimes and they ended up institutionalized, and it was a whole like weird kind of combination of like true crime and like twins paranormal stuff. And then a lot of our other stuff was about Delphi. Delphi is like no joke, like 3 or 4 of these, and same thing for Chris Kremers and Lizanne Froon. That's a whole bunch of these top ones. But then you have, I'm going to show you the actual file in a second, but it's interesting to look at this and say like you can see why we're tempted sometimes to follow like super popular topics that have a lot of obsessive people around it, because like no joke, we almost doubled our subscribers between Delphi and Chris Kremers and Lizanne Froon. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the most fun. I mean, I think Duras for sure is probably totally over Delphi at this point. And we've done a lot of variety. You look at our shows, I mean, it's ironic that the stuff about the virus was actually our worst performing content. But this is total watch time, and you can really get a sense for what's going on there. And then, this is hours watched, and it's really not that much different. I think there's a little bit of variation, but once again, some of these are going to be because they're just some of our oldest pieces of content. So I think John Bonet is up there, but so is Delphi and Lizanne, Chris Kremers, Lizanne Froon. Yeah, once again, and then the virus stuff did so badly. Poor virus. So look at that. Look at that. Meanwhile, like some of some of the science stuff, or my most favorite stuff, like the MK Ultra CIA conspiracy stuff, which actually has a lot of legs under it as far as a going conspiracy theory. You guys didn't like it. Same thing for Tunguska. Here's a UFO one, Rendlesham Forest. That was really interesting to me. One, the Kobe Bryant coverage that we did, which was a news event coverage. No one cared. I thought I had a pretty good theory there for what happened, but yeah, nobody cares. So, okay, that's why we don't cover that. but it doesn't mean we can't come back to it. And even covering the Netflix stuff didn't necessarily do that well. Like, here's Alonzo Brooks right in the middle. Um, it's Ray Rivera right there in the middle. It does okay. The Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell thing, that was a current event that we covered, and once again, that was, I don't know, pretty compelling to me. It was almost like a Casey Anthony with a twist kind of story, but it really, like I said, maybe it's just one of those things that had so much coverage already, you all didn't want to hear it. But meanwhile, like, look, Brian Schaefer is like right next to each other, probably in our top 12, 15. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. I hope this is as interesting to you as it is to me when I show it to you. You're not yawning. So then I thought it would be good to also go ahead and show you. This is actually the topic list that we use. So when we go and we start teeing up cases, we'll like, I'll have a rating for, like we'll have a Wikipedia link or other research link. This is sort of our topic board. Oumuamua was one I put up there recently. That was that weird space object, but I don't know that we're going to cover that because I don't know that everyone is so interested in that. So I'm only going to make that a show or an extra if people are interested. So yeah, I don't know. This is sort of to give you a sense when you tell us in the comments what you would like to see. This is where I put it. So please know that we do listen, absolutely, when you make suggestions for things. And finally, just to address some of that data I was talking about, case in point, you can kind of get a sense for like views and watch time and average view duration. It's kind of interesting when you look at like the Silent Twins. Silent Twins is like our most viewed, though not our most longest watched item. It's interesting because we got good SEO for it, but I think some good amount of people came and like bailed, it looks like, in the first 5 to 10 minutes. This is an average. So, it's interesting to look at that, but then if you sort it, you say, well, what's our longest listened to? Well, no surprise. Uras's most recent 6-hour podcast he did on his own has the longest duration. So that's certainly a good statement. This is as of, February 4th when I'm recording this, lifetime numbers. It's already, in our top percentile here for, view duration and doing really well for the watch time. I'm sure like a month from now, it'll probably be in the top 5. And, on the other hand, some of the other most recent shows have done well, like Tower 7. But it's a pretty interesting spread of stuff, and no surprise, a lot of these are famous cases like Kieran Horman, Delphi, etc. For total watch, if we could sort it by total watch time, you can get a sense of, Dyatlov's up there, of course, because it's one of our oldest episodes, episode number 8. So, okay. So if you made it this far, thank you for hanging out with me here. I really enjoyed giving you these insights to the show. If you like updates like this and kind of casual conversations to the audience, asking for feedback, then I really look forward to seeing what your feedback is in this episode. I know you miss Uras right now, so do I, but he's busy and we're barely awake during the same times of day. There's only a few hours overlap, so thank you for joining me now. I look forward to doing other extra shows in addition to our normal weekly episodes. Please don't forget to hit subscribe and be sure to check out our Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, other social media, and our podcast accounts. Podcast is available pretty much everywhere. Spotify, Audible, Apple Music, you name it, we are there. So thank you and have a great day.